The morning I found out my husband of 38 years had changed the locks on our house, I was standing in the parking lot of a Kroger in my good coat, holding 2 bags of groceries and a bouquet of yellow tulips I'd bought because they were his favorite. I stood there for a full minute before I understood what the key was telling me. It wasn't the lock that was new, it was everything. My name is Odette. I'm 63 years old. I taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary in Columbus, Ohio for 26 years, and I took early retirement at 57 because my husband Raymond, everyone called him Ray, but I always called him Raymond when I was serious, asked me to. He'd gotten a promotion that required travel and our youngest granddaughter had just been born, and he said, "Odette, we don't need 2 incomes anymore. Enjoy yourself. You've earned it." I believed him. I believed him about most things for 38 years. That Tuesday in March, I set the groceries down on the front step, put the tulips on top of one of the bags, and called him. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted Raymond, "The key isn't working. Did you change the locks?" His reply came 4 minutes later. 4 minutes I spent sitting on my own front porch like a stranger. "We need to talk. Come at the Marriott on Dublin Granville, room 244. Come alone." I sat with that text for a long moment. The tulips were starting to droop in the cold. A neighbor's dog barked twice from somewhere down the street. The whole neighborhood looked exactly the same as it always had. The Hendersons' blue shutters, the Bradford pear tree we planted ourselves in 2004. And I thought, something is very wrong. I drove to that Marriott. I don't know why. I suppose some part of me still thought there was an explanation. A gas leak, a break-in, something that would make sense. Raymond was sitting at the small desk by the window when I walked in. He was in a suit, which was strange for a Tuesday afternoon. He looked groomed, prepared. He had a folder on the desk in front of him. "Sit down, Odette," he said. "I'll stand," I said. "What is going on?" He cleared his throat. He'd always done that when he was about to say something he knew I wouldn't like. I'd heard that sound before, job changes, before we moved cities twice, before he told me about a car accident he'd hidden from me for 2 weeks. I knew that sound the way you know the creak of your own floorboards. "My father passed away last month," he said. I stared at him. His father, Clarence, had been in a memory care facility outside of Pittsburgh for 4 years. We hadn't spoken to him much. There was a complicated history there, one that Raymond had never wanted to discuss in detail. "I'm so sorry," I said, because even in that strange moment I was. "Why didn't you tell me?" "There were things I needed to figure out first." "What things?" He opened the folder. I could see papers, official looking, dense with text. "Clarence left everything to me," he said. "The house in Pittsburgh, investment accounts, a commercial property he'd been leasing. He paused. "It's significant." I waited. "I've been speaking with a financial advisor," Raymond said, "and a lawyer, and I made some decisions about my life going forward." "My life, not our life." "Raymond," I said very slowly, "what decisions?" He couldn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the folder instead. "I want a divorce. I've already had the papers drawn up. They're in here. My attorney says the process can be simple if we're both cooperative." He slid the folder across the desk toward me. "The house. I know it's disruptive, but I'm asking you to move out by the end of the month. I'll cover your first 3 months at an apartment, wherever you want." I didn't touch the folder. "You changed the locks," I said, "before you told me." He didn't answer. "You changed the locks on a house I've lived in for 22 years, and then you sent me a text message to come to a hotel room. I thought it would be easier in a neutral space." "Easier for whom, Raymond?" He finally looked at me, and I saw it then. The thing I'd been not seeing for I don't know how long. The rehearsed calm. The suit. The folder lined up perfectly on the desk. This was not a conversation. This was a procedure. He had already made every decision, he just needed me to sign. "Is there someone else?" I asked. The pause before he answered told me everything. Her name was Simone. She was 34. She worked at the investment firm where Raymond had been doing business for the past 2 years. He told me this like he was reading from a report. Factual, measured, like her age and her profession were just relevant data points. I picked up my purse. I left the folder on the desk. "I'll be in touch," I said. I drove home to my sister Wanda's house, because where else was I going to go? And I sat in her kitchen and I didn't cry for a long time. Wanda made coffee. She didn't ask too many questions. She'd known Raymond for 38 years too, and I could see her doing the same thing I was doing, recalibrating, rebuilding the map of something we thought we understood. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm not signing anything." The next morning, I started making a list. Not an emotional list, not what I'd lost, not what hurt, but a practical one. What did I actually know? What did I have? What did I need to find out? I knew that our house, the one in Columbus, we had bought together in 2001. I knew my name was on the mortgage. But I also knew that Raymond had refinanced it in 2018, and I couldn't remember the exact details of what I'd signed. I knew that Raymond had been managing most of our finances for the past 6 years, since I'd retired. My pension from the Columbus City Schools went directly into our joint checking account, or it had. I opened my banking app and checked. The joint account had $340 in it. I sat with that number, $340, in an account that had carried 5 figures for most of our marriage. I didn't panic. I told myself not to panic, but my hands were shaking a little when I called the pension office to ask about changing my direct deposit. The woman on the phone was patient and kind, and yes, she said I could redirect my pension to a personal account, and yes, it could take effect by the next payment cycle. I opened a new account at a different bank that afternoon. Wanda drove me. She didn't say much. She just parked the car and waited. I also called a lawyer. I didn't know many lawyers. I'd been a teacher my whole career. But my friend from church, I'd known her since our kids were in elementary school together. She mentioned that her cousin had used a woman named Miss Biss Hargrove for a divorce case a few years back, and had come out of it with more than she'd expected. I called the number. Miss Hargrove's office was in a mid-rise in Westerville on the 4th floor overlooking a parking garage. It was not impressive. But when I sat down across from her, I understood immediately why my friend's cousin had recommended her. She was somewhere in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the yellow legal pad already covered in handwriting. And she looked at me the way someone looks at a problem they're genuinely interested in solving. She let me tell the whole story without interrupting. Then she asked questions. Specific, precise questions about dates, accounts, what I'd signed, what I hadn't signed, what I knew, and what I was guessing. "Tell me about this inheritance," he said. "When did his father die?" "He said last month," I told her, "but he didn't tell me until yesterday." She wrote something down. "Do you know the approximate value?" He said significant. "I don't know more than that." "Here's what you need to understand," Miss Hargrove said, setting down her pen. "In Ohio, inheritances are generally considered separate property, meaning what he inherited from his father wouldn't automatically be divided in a divorce. But," she paused, "in the deliberate way that means what comes next matters. That changes significantly, depending on what he does with that money. If he uses inherited funds to pay down the mortgage on a jointly owned home, or invests in property that you both have claim to, or commingles it with marital assets in any way, it can become marital property, all of it, or a portion of it." I thought about the folder, the papers he'd had ready, the fact that he'd already spoken to his own attorney before telling me his father had died. "He was very prepared," I said. "They usually are," Miss Hargrove said, not unkindly, which means we need to move quickly. She filed for discovery within the week. I didn't fully understand what that meant at first. I thought it was something that happened in courtrooms, not in the early stages of a divorce. But Miss Hargrove explained that discovery allowed us to formally request financial records. All of them, every account, every transaction, everything Raymond had done with money in the past several years, including whatever he'd done with what he'd inherited from Clarence. What came back took my breath away. Not in the dramatic way people mean when they say that. I mean it literally. I was sitting at Wanda's kitchen table when Miss Hargrove called, and I had to put the phone down for a moment and just breathe. Clarence had left Raymond just under $2 million. The Pittsburgh house alone was worth $480,000. There was a commercial property leasing to a medical office outside of Pittsburgh that brought in $6,000 a month. There were investment accounts Raymond had already partially liquidated. And here was the part that made Miss Hargrove's voice change. Raymond had, in the 8 weeks since his father's death, 8 weeks during which he hadn't told me anything, used $400,000 of that inheritance to pay off the remaining mortgage on our Columbus house. Our house, the one both our names were on. Does he realize what he did? I asked. I doubt it, Miss Hargrove said, or his attorney didn't catch it. By paying off the mortgage on a jointly titled property with inheritance funds, he commingled a significant portion of that inheritance with a marital asset. We'll argue that the increase in home equity belongs, at least in part, to the marital estate. I was quiet for a moment. How much are we talking about? I said. The house appraised at $620,000 last year, she said. With the mortgage paid off, that equity is fully accessible. And depending on how the judge views the commingling, it could mean a claim on a portion of what was used to pay it down, not just the equity itself. I thought about the tulips I'd left on the front step. I thought about the key that wouldn't turn. I thought about 38 years. What do I do? I asked. Let me do my job, Miss Hargrove said. Raymond's attorney contacted my attorney 2 days later, apparently surprised that I had one. Raymond himself called me 3 times that week. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to speak to him calmly, and I wasn't going to speak to him any other way. When we finally met in Miss Hargrove's conference room, both attorneys present, Raymond looked like he hadn't been sleeping well. Simone was not mentioned. The folder was not produced. It was a different conversation than the one in the Marriott hotel room. He was less prepared, less certain. He kept glancing at his attorney in a way that told me things had not gone the way he'd planned. His attorney offered a settlement. It was not generous. I watched Miss Hargrove read it without any expression on her face, and then I watched her set it down. "We'll be declining," she said. Raymond looked at me. I think he expected me to intervene, to soften it, to be the peacemaker I'd been the 38 years. I looked back at him and said nothing. The process took 7 months. I won't make it sound simple, because it wasn't. There were days I sat in Wanda's guest room and stared at the ceiling and thought about the 22 years of Sunday mornings in that house, the Christmases, the grandchildren's birthdays, the kitchen where I'd learned to make Raymond's mother's cornbread from a handwritten recipe card his mother had given me when we got married. But here is what I also did during those 7 months. I stayed focused on the list, the practical one. I redirected my pension. I filed my own tax return for the first time in a decade. I met with a financial advisor of my own, a woman named Miss Mez Okafor, who had an office downtown and who explained my options with the kind of patience I recognized from years of teaching children who needed things explained more than once. I learned things about my own finances I should have known 20 years earlier. I learned about survivor benefits from Raymond's pension. I learned what I was entitled to from his Social Security record because we'd been married more than 10 years. I learned that the retirement accounts we'd accumulated during our marriage, not the inheritance, but what we'd saved together, those were marital assets too. The final settlement was nothing like that first folder Raymond had stood across the hotel desk. I kept the Columbus house. My name was already on it, and the law in Ohio is clear about jointly titled property. Raymond had thought that because I'd left when he changed the locks, I'd somehow forfeited my claim. I hadn't. You do not forfeit your legal rights by being too stunned to fight in the first hour. I also received a share of the retirement accounts we'd built over the marriage, divided through what Miss Hargrove called a QDRO, a document that let me receive my portion without either of us taking a tax penalty. I received half of the equity that Raymond's inheritance payment had built into our jointly titled home, because commingling those funds had made them marital property under Ohio law. And I received a portion of his monthly pension in the form of survivor and divorce benefits. Raymond got his freedom. He got Simone, who I understand is now his fiancée. He got the Pittsburgh property, and whatever remained in the accounts he hadn't commingled. It was still considerable. I'm not pretending he walked away with nothing, but he walked away with considerably less than he planned. The week I moved back into my own house, after the settlement was finalized, after the new key was made, after I stood in the front hallway for a long moment by myself, I bought another bouquet of yellow tulips, not for Raymond, just for myself, because I've always liked them. I put them in the blue pitcher on the kitchen windowsill. The same pitcher I bought at a craft fair in 2007. The same windowsill that faces the Bradford pear tree we planted together, which blooms white every April without any input from either of us. My daughter called that evening. She'd been worried about me for 7 months in the quiet, steady way she worries about things. Not dramatically, but constantly, like a low hum you can feel but can't always hear. I told her I was home, that I was fine, that I'd made dinner for myself for the first time in a while, and it had been very good. "Are you really okay, Mum?" she asked. "I will be," I said, and I meant it, which was different from the times I'd said it before. People ask me sometimes what I would tell other women in situations like mine. I don't have a speech. I'm not a counselor, and I'm not an expert on divorce law, and I'm not going to pretend my situation applies to everyone's. But I'll say this, do not sign anything immediately. Not when you're in shock, not when you're being pressured, not when someone is telling you that cooperation will make everything simpler. Simple for whom is always the question worth asking. Know what's in your own accounts, know what's in your own name, know what you're entitled to under the laws of your own state, because those laws are often more protective than the person sitting across the table from you wants you to know. And get a lawyer who looks at your situation like a problem worth solving. I'm 63 years old, and I live alone now in the house where I raised my children, and some mornings that is very quiet, and some mornings that quiet is the most peaceful thing I've ever known. Last week I signed up to volunteer at Millbrook Elementary again, not teaching, just helping in the reading room on Wednesday afternoons. The librarian there remembered me. She gave me a hug in the hallway and said, "We've missed you." "I've missed it too," I told her. More than I knew. The yellow tulips on the windowsill are still standing. It's been 8 days, which is longer than they usually last. I take it as nothing more than what it is, a good coincidence, a small, uncomplicated thing going right. Sometimes that's enough to build from. I think about the tulips a lot, actually. The ones I left on my own front step, because a key that used to be mine stopped working. There's something about that image, standing outside a door you've opened 10,000 times, groceries in hand, flowers drooping in the cold, that says everything about what happens when you stop paying attention to what belongs to you. I don't mean that as blame toward myself. I spent a long time being very careful not to turn this into a story where I failed somehow. But I do think about what I let go of quietly over the years. The finances. The accounts. The decisions I trusted Raymond to make, because it was easier, because I was tired after school, because we'd been married long enough that I stopped asking questions I should have kept asking. That's not a moral failure. It's what happens when people feel safe. When you love someone and you've built something together and you believe, without examining it too closely, that what's yours is yours and what's shared is shared and the whole arrangement will hold. And then one day it doesn't, and you're standing in a parking lot in your good coat, wondering why the key won't turn. What I know now is that the moment Raymond's father died, the moment that money entered the picture, Raymond made a series of choices. He chose not to tell me. He chose to speak to attorneys and financial advisors without including me. He chose to have the locks changed before the conversation. Every one of those choices was a moral one, and every one of them said something about who he was when he thought he had the advantage. That's the thing about how people behave when they believe no one is watching, or when they believe the outcome is already settled. You find out what they actually are. And the choices I made afterward said something about who I am. I could have signed that folder. I understand why some women do. You're in shock, you're ashamed, even though you have nothing to be ashamed of. You want it to be over. You want to stop feeling the way you feel in that hotel room. When you understand, in your body before you understand it in your mind, that the person across the desk has been planning this without you. But I didn't sign, and then I made a list, and then I called Miss Hargrove, and then I redirected my pension and opened a new account and asked every question I should have asked years earlier, and I kept doing the next right thing even when I was doing it from my sister's guest room with shaking hands. That's what I want other women to hear, not a speech. Just this. Clear thinking in the middle of pain is one of the hardest things a person can do, and it is also the thing that changes everything. Raymond was counting on me to be too hurt to think straight. He had timed it, I believe, so that the shock would carry me through the signing. What he hadn't counted on was that I'd been a teacher for 26 years, and teachers know how to hold themselves together in front of something difficult and figure out what needs to happen next. And the strength it takes to do that, to stay standing when someone you trusted tries to knock the ground out from under you, that doesn't come from nowhere. It's built slowly, over a lifetime of showing up even when it's hard. I showed up for my students. And when the moment came, I showed up for myself. The house is quiet in the mornings now. I've gotten used to it. There's a particular light that comes through the kitchen window around 7:30 that I'd forgotten about, because for years I was always rushing, always making Raymond's coffee first. I sit with my own coffee now and watch that light move across the floor, and I think, this is mine. I earned this, not the settlement, not the legal outcome. This, the quiet, the light, the tulips that lasted 8 days. This is what I built, and it belongs to me.